Now he's just...
Yeah, yeah, sorry, I was muted. Yeah, yeah, basically you have the Cinder code, and so you have, if you go into Python and you write import Cinder, it's there, the drivers are there, the dependencies are there, but what you don't have is the Cinder services running. And the idea is to reduce the number of services that you need, to not need RabbitMQ, database if you don't need it. So basically it's a way for any Python code out there to be able to consume our drivers.
I see. So that's why we needed to create a whole nother database mechanism and database schema and all of that stuff as well, is to store what the users created with CinderLab and manage those and whatnot, right?
Yeah, basically, since you don't know the program that it's going to be consuming CinderLab, you don't want to assume where they want to store the data. So basically, it has a plugin mechanism to store the metadata. One of them is the database one, which mostly uses the code we already have. I think it doesn't add much on top of what we have for normal Cinder, but it also has other mechanisms, for example, just keeping stuff in the memory, and the caller serializes and stores it however they want. And thanks to this, you can also write easily into your own Python code plugin to store whatever you are storing the stuff. For example, in Ember CSI, I wrote in Ember CSI project a little plugin that stores all the data inside Kubernetes etcd using CRDs. So that way, I don't need to use a database or anything.
Okay. That makes sense. So I was looking at CinderLib and I was thinking that maybe it might be useful to provide yet another API call into it to fetch the list of available drivers. And when I started going down that road, I started looking at how we're defining our drivers and how we're defining all the options in the driver file, but not part of the driver object itself. So there's no way to fetch what options for that driver are required and what the values are. So I actually wanted to talk with you about that a little bit and see if there would be any kind of usefulness for creating a static method in the driver classes for fetching, say, for example, what are the 3-part options that I need to specify before instantiating that? Because right now there's no way to do that. You have to actually look at the driver file and find out what are the options for the 3-part driver instead of saying, well, I know I want to use the 3-part driver, but what are the options for it, and doing that programmatically.
Yep, that's one of the problems I have right now. Like it's exactly what you described. It's the problem that I have to figure out because it's not easy since you have inheritance and you have the parent driver could be adding configuration options, but the child could not be using some of them, others yes. So yeah, it could be amazing to have that kind of functionality to be able to just get the options for a given driver as a static method, like you said, or a class method or something like that.
Okay. I started putting together a POC patch to actually try and do that against one of the drivers. I think I used LVM as one of them. I sort of kind of got it to work, and at some point I wanted to, I can put up a gist and let you look at it and see what you think about it. I don't have it on me right now, but if we're going to go the route of providing a library for accessing Cinder drivers and all, I think this is probably a feature that should be in there at some point.
Yes, it was in my head. It was just like it's a little bit complicated, or it is either really complicated or it requires changes on all the drivers. So I left it for a later
Okay.
moment.
Yeah, so it kind of sounds like we might want to have a field in the drivers that tells you what options they're interested in. Is that kind of?
Yep.
So that's kind of the route that I started going down. Is I created a static method in the base driver that the drivers themselves would extend or override, and they would report their options that they already have defined. So it's just a matter of reporting that same the Oslo conf object that they've already created, reporting that back up. So it could be really simple, or we could really make it difficult and try and cascade up all of the parent options and all that stuff. I think that's kind of unnecessary to an extent, but I would just wanted to throw that out there because I think the patches for supplying just the driver specific options that they're already declaring would be fairly straightforward to do.
Yes, I like that idea for the same reasons that you mentioned. Simplicity and it is. Yep. And I have, since you reviewed the Cinderella code, I have added a method to the backend class, which is list supported drivers, which basically returns you all the drivers that are available in the specific Cinder installation.
Okay, cool. That was one of the methods that I had actually implemented too as part of this little POC that I was working on. So I think that's great that you did that because I think that's required too.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, cool. I think that's all I had.
Yep. And for example, the Over team that already has integration with Cinderlib was really asking me for that list of configuration options because they have a GUI and right now they just allow any key value to go in the configuration options, but they have no mechanism to actually know, validate or anything.
Yeah, that was one of the farther down the road things that I was thinking about. Is like, well, if you had this, then you can create a UI around it or something in the command line that allows you to, one, see what they are and the description for each of them that they are, as well as providing a way to input in the field format that's specified, et cetera, et cetera. So I think there's a lot of value to adding this.
So
and even for Cinder itself, because people usually have trouble figuring out which options are available in Cinder. Like, they suddenly go to a new system and they are testing or whatever, and they are writing the configuration they had stored, like copy paste the configuration, but they don't realize that some parameters have changed and stuff like that.
Yeah, I agree, especially for someone that's trying to deploy what drivers are available. The only answer really is the source code right now. And what are the options? Well, you have to look at the source code again to understand what those are. It would be nice to, if we had this in place, we could, I guess, eventually add it to maybe Cinder Manager, Cinder Client, to actually dump the list of drivers and their options as well, potentially, just as an idea.
This kind of goes along the line of your capabilities reporting improvements too, doesn't it?
I was thinking that might line up with some of that.
Yeah, I think it's
It could dovetail into that, yeah. The options as well as the capabilities could be listed for an individual driver.
Did you know what the status is with that integration with Overt? How that's going?
yeah. Can you talk more about what that means? Because I'm curious.
Yeah, let me see if I can find, because they tweeted a video with a demo of the integration that they have
Oh, nice.
a couple of weeks ago.
It's
Well, sorry?
familiar with what Overt is.
No.
Yes, because we were building our entire product around integration with that.
So Overt, I mean, this is my dumb guy explanation.
It's so overt.
Overt's the open source basic Rev, and so it's kind of a vSphere-ish virtual machine.
Free and open source virtualization management platform.
So it's kind of like a
Free?
VMware
Wait,
platform.
nobody
on top
said
of
free.
Vert.
Okay.
That was the big Red Hat Vert thing before OpenStack became the
I see.
big Vert thing. But it's much more like the classic VMware kind of. So they actually were asking me like 5 years ago, can we use Cinder drivers? We want to be able to use Cinder, development and handle storage stuff. So they've been curious about this for a long, long time.
Okay.
But what are they hoping to do with the Cinder integration? So,
Well, for CinderLib, the benefit to them is that they can, from Overt, connect to all these different backends that we have drivers for and use them for VM storage by just taking the Cinder driver code instead of having to write a whole new driver.
okay.
Overt.
So the same thing everybody else is trying to do, you reuse Cinder drivers for their own purposes.
Yeah.
Okay. Because I mean, I know that RHV already has some integration with Cinder.
Yeah, so that's via the Cinder API, right?
Yeah, I think
Where you
so.
actually connect to an OpenStack cloud, I think.
Okay, that's the difference there.
Yeah, so that's the big distinction is that for this, you don't have to have an OpenStack deployment. You just have to have a backend that OpenStack knows how to talk to.
So Gorka shared this link. How long is that video, Gorka?
I think it's like 2 minutes or maybe even less. It's
Shall we
not
watch?
too long. Yeah, 2 minutes, 4 seconds.
Okay, we're gonna,
We'll give it 2 minutes.
I have some follow-up questions about CinderLib and how it integrates with the volume manager. And there's, go ahead, Jay.
But it doesn't integrate with the volume manager. That was one of the sticking points, is that it bypasses all of that and just goes right to the driver.
is there supposed to be sound with this, Gorka?
No,
Okay.
there is no sound.
So what this is over, we're looking at right now.
Yeah,
Okay.
they're just adding Cinder options in it.
Oh, so that's how they do it, just open key value pairs?
Yeah, right now, since they cannot know what they have, they don't know what are the options available. That's how they are doing right now. That's why they were so interested in the idea that, in that idea of having the parameters.
Well, I'll see if I can steal some cycles from work and work on this, because I've been wanting to find something that I can contribute again, because I've been so stuck on SUSE-based stuff for so long.
We would definitely benefit from this too, having that kind of capability in there.
And so would we. Our deployment model would obviously make use of all the options in our UI.
Kind of
You know,
nice.
a lot of the UI capabilities look very similar to what OpenStack can do.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because this could be exposed up through RHV as well, right?
Yeah, it's the same
It's,
thing.
yeah, it's just your official version compared
This
to the
this is
open
the
source.
Fedora of
Yeah,
RHV.
Yeah.
Or the CentOS.
Is this all Python, or how is this all built?
No, Overt is not Python. What they are, I really don't know the language, the programming language they're using, but what they do is they are calling their own Python script that calls CinderLib, because they are creating the resources on one host and storing the data on another. So they serialize the data and brings it back to the main site or the main host, and it gets stored there. So that it's not Python.
Java.
Ugh.
Oh, that's right, because it came out of that acquisition a long, long time ago.
So is there no value or use in OS Brick as well? On the
Oh,
remote
it
side?
is. Cinderlib is using OS Brick.
Okay.
Because one of the things you can do is directly in you can either have it via one single call, like you create a volume, you say volume.attach, and it gets attached to a local host, or you can just export it to a different node, and then on the other node you can run Cinderlib without a backend, and then just do the attach. So it is using OS Brick for all the attach, which is what we want, because we have put a lot of work into making OS Brick actually work fine. So
Okay. So on the remote host where you're actually doing the volume attach, you would have to do the same thing that we do between Nova and Cinder in the respect that the remote host, you have to get the connector from it.
well, you can pass, yeah, you need the connector, but usually what you are serializing is the volume attachment or the volume itself, or both nodes share the same persistence. So in the example of, there are examples in the documentation, but for example, for Ember CSI, what I do is both the nodes that only can attach and the node that is the controller both share the same metadata storage, which is Kubernetes. So the controller creates the volume and it makes the export to the other node, and the node just gets from the persistent storage the volume object itself and completes the attachment.
Okay.
So you don't need to expose, if you can share the metadata, persistent storage, whatever the database, you don't need to actually know almost anything about the connector information and things like that.
Well, that's kind of confusing to me because most backends require specific information about the host they're doing the export to, such as if you're fiber channel, you need to have the actual fiber channel HBAs that are on the host you're connecting to, or iSCSI, the specific IQN of the box you're exporting to, as well as the IP. Because some Cinder backends require that in order to do the export correctly. That's why I was asking.
Yes. Yeah, that's the metadata persistent plugin allows you to store key value pairs with whatever you want. So the way I'm doing it in Ember CSI, I am creating for each node a key value pair with the key is the node name and the pair with and I store exactly what you say. The OS Brick connect, what was it called?
Get connector properties.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay, cool. Cool.
I wonder if we should do, we've got time planned to do kind of group review of things. I wonder if we should try to go through his patch and get that stuff merged here.
Yeah, I'm kind of thinking, especially at this point, it'd be good to get it in and then just anything else, just deal with follow-up patches.
Yeah, because I think we're at the point where all the major concerns have been addressed. We're not going to hold it from going in. There's increased interest in it, so.
Yeah, and Gorka, I think I saw the functional tests that you added were passing.
Yep.
Okay, good. That was my main concern, so I'm happy.
So the packaging
Yeah,
for this is separate as well,
Separate.
or how does this get packaged up? Does this get built as a separate Pipey package, or?
It has, you can later on decide how to build your RPMs, but right now it has its own namespace. So you have Cinder and you have Cinderlib namespace. So in your packages, you can split and it is also in a different directory, so you can easily create in your package spec. You can say, okay, this is creating cinderlib, and it has to include only the cinderlib directory. And Cinder, you have to add, please don't include the cinderlib stuff. So you can have different packages and make the cinderlib package dependent on Cinder.
Okay. Have we tried building a Pipey package out of this? Is
I don't
that
believe
separate
you.
from Cinder?
Cinderlib, yeah, you have it.
Orca has one
If
up there.
you install Cinderlib, you will have the latest code.
Okay. And so whenever this merges in, will the source repo for where that gets generated from will be Cinder instead of your own?
Well, once this get merged, the PyPy code, the package would not be generated because I'm generating the PyPy code from the Cinderlib repository, which is in my personal GitHub account. So, well, I don't know how we are usually generating because the PyPy packages, but I could just move the account or.
Well, don't we have PyPy packages for Cinder client?
Yeah,
And wouldn't we want to have one for Cinderlib as
I
well?
think we would just set up our release stuff to publish cinderlib for each release.
Okay.
To PyPy, like we do with other stuff.
So it sounds like we have a to-do there to figure out.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that shouldn't be hard.
It shouldn't
Somebody-
hold up
Somebody needs to go through it.
the patch.
Yeah.
You're right.
I think it should be an immediate to do after it lands, though, is to get that in.
I'm not sure how that's going to work with it being in the same repo.
In the
as-
same repo. That's kind of why I asked.
Might have to pip install Cinder, and then through that you get Cinderlib. But that's pulling in a lot of stuff that you wouldn't need.
Yeah, there's so much in Cinder that you don't need, which would require you to install RabbitMQ and all the
Yeah.
apps for all that crap, which is the whole point of Cinderlib itself, is not requiring that stuff.
Well, yeah, I'm sure you can set it up to publish it separately.
Not in the same repo, I don't think. But we wanted it in the same repo because we wanted to make sure that any changes to Cinder
Everyone could see.
wouldn't break Cinderlib. So we kind of have a catch-22 that we want it together, but we probably also want it apart.
Can you look into that, Gorka? Did you hear that conversation?
Yeah,
Okay.
but I don't know right now how to do how we do the PyPy releases and everything. So
Yeah,
I don't either,
it's
that's-
it's all managed in like the project config stuff in Infra.
Yeah.
Um,
We can talk about it more later, but I'm pretty sure to do publish separate packages, we can't have the code together in one repo.
I do remember hearing somebody ran into that a while ago.
Well, that was part of the reason why I think we split out the Tempest plugins, because there were basically two deliverables in one repo.
Oh.
Oops.
Well, maybe we need to figure this out before we merge this then.
Maybe we just make a separate repo that uses this, got a submodule of Cinder, and then you can release from that or something. Because it's a limitation, like in the OpenStack tooling, right? It's not like a pip issue as far as.
No,
I know.
I think it is a pip issue. I don't think it's specific to OpenStack.
Really?
Yeah.
I think you have to declare and set up config or set up what project how you describe the project, and you either have
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cinder or you have something else. I don't know if there's a way to describe two different ones that are the same.
So this patch declares two modules, but it's all part of the same Cinder package.
So
Yeah. So
that would
there's
be a
no
problem
way.
with Pipey then.
Yep.
So for someone that would want to consume Cinderlib, I would want to be able to do pip install Cinderlib
Yeah.
and
Yeah,
not have
that's-
to install Cinder, then Cinderlib, or get some RPM or deb file just to install Cinderlib.
That's a good point.
Sounds like we should figure that out first.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe. Because once we
Merge
we
it.
could merge it and then we could remove it, but
That sounds
yeah,
not good.
yeah.
Do we want to try to dig into that now or dig into it at the end of the day and figure out what we need to do after we've gotten through other topics? I think we should try to figure that out while we're all together, though. And have the release guy in the room.
Or Gorka can just come back tomorrow with the solution. But yeah, let's table it for now and then figure it out later.
Okay, so we're not going to merge what he has out there right now until we answer the questions about how we can do PyP packages.
Yeah.
All right. Who can answer those questions? Do we know?
Well, we know they do need to be separate packages. So
Okay.
I guess the question is, what's the best way that we can get what we wanted with making sure any changes to Cinder don't break CinderLib, but have them as two separate repos.
So the advantage of having them in the same repo is that
Well, the main goal of that, I think, was to keep changes to like driver API kind of stuff in sync. So we don't introduce compatibility.
Yeah, that was kind of the concern. We don't change the driver interface much, but when we do, we don't want to accidentally break everything.
Since we don't have like a defined driver API that's stable or anything, that's kind of the easiest way to make sure they.
And my big concern about CinderLib was that by doing this, we're kind of making that driver interface a public API that we have to treat as a public contract.
yeah.
And having it all together just makes it easy if we need to change something in the drivers that we'd be able to change it right there.
Well, my hope would be is that the API into CinderLib itself is still abstracted away from the drivers enough that it could manage any changes that we do to the driver for, say, features that we add in the future. Oh, well, we need to add this new parameter to volume create that.
Yeah.
I mean, God, Cinder's been around for so long now, you would think like the API would be pretty stable.
And our driver
It's pretty stable. We just never like made the decision to like
This is what
declare
it
it
is.
stable
Yeah.
and like say this is what it is.
And we have had, it doesn't happen often, but we have had occasional times where we had to change. I think you had a whole set where you had to update every single driver because we added another parameter.
It's fairly
or something
possible
like
we'll have more of those as we continue.
that. Yeah.
If we ever get around to trying to root out all the driver database stuff that we
Yeah.
shouldn't be doing, that may cause some more changes.
Yeah.
But it almost seems like putting CinderLib as part of Cinder creates that contract immediately.
And that was my concern. I originally pushed back.
Well,
on
it
it.
creates that contract between Cinder and CinderLib, but that's
Yeah.
not really.
Between the consumer of
It's not
CinderLib.
really a public API, though. It's really,
CinderLib would be a public API.
yeah, but CinderLib's API is a whole different issue.
Yeah. So I guess the question that I was trying to get to is could we still do this by having CinderLib not part of Cinder and making another project like OS Brick is or the extension is and all that stuff that has its own release cycle and
I think we can. It's just.
and how do you do that testing? Because CinderLib is really kind of dependent upon that version of Cinder.
Well, that's the thing, you have to have really robust testing, or we have to go define an API for the drivers and say, if we're gonna change it, we're gonna make sure we look at this and that.
We can define this.
One question, our third-party CIs are pulling OS Brick and all that and things from PyPy, from master, from water, because one of the things that is good when you have CinderLib and the code in the same repo is that all the third-party CI can immediately add the CinderLib stuff in there and see if things break or not in their patches.
So in terms of testing with OS Brick and third-party CI, as far as I know, most third-party CIs will use the PyPy version of OS Brick, unless in the case of something like the third-party CI that was written for OS Brick, they will use the latest patch. But that is a different CI altogether, because they're actually testing to make sure that changes in the fiber channel connector in OS Brick itself doesn't break 3-par FC. But as far as like a 3-par driver test or whatnot in Cinder, that I think those use PyPy packages.
Which they would probably do the same with Cinderlib. So
Yes.
we could be breaking things and only find out after we release Cinderlib.
Yeah, because this is actually something with Brick that we've needed to look at in more depth for a while. I think there's some
Yeah, we've had the
gaps
same
in
issue
CI
in Brick.
coverage where version mismatches can
Yeah.
let things slip through, and then when the Brick gets released, it's like, oops, we broke stuff that we didn't see before,
Yeah.
because we don't always run code from master when we should.
I think we had that at the end of Queens or something. We did an OS Brick release and realized that something we had merged way back broke things, and it wasn't until we released it that we found out.
So we're not introducing a new problem. If we make Cinderlib its own,
It's just another data point where problems could be.
Yeah. We just might end up in a situation where we need to quick get a Cinderlib release out
Right.
to unbreak things.
Well, even if we have the code in Cinder, we're still going to run into that issue if people are using the PyPy package to test things. So
Yeah.
it doesn't really matter where it lives.
We could have a periodic job that,
No, not really, because if I'm not mistaken, when you install, don't you install directly from the code itself? Don't you run the setup of Cinder when you're running tests from the code base from master? What I mean is, when you're running tests on third-party CI or anywhere, you pull master, you put the patches on top of it, and then you install, right? Cinder from that code.
Yeah.
And in that case, you are also installing Cinderlib at the same time.
as it is right now, but we're saying that we probably need to break Cinderlib out of the Cinder repo and have it its own thing. And that's
Then
where,
it's going to have the same problem as OS
Yeah.
break,
yeah,
and you're going to find out really, really late.
yeah. But
That's
like we were
program.
saying, if we're gonna publish this as its own package, it does need to be in its own repo, because you can't publish two different PyPy packages from the same repo.
But we are not releasing Cinder in PyPy.
Correct.
Well, we are. There's an effort underway to publish all services.
As their own.
Yeah. And we would still have the thing, we
That's
still
a great
can't
idea.
just get the one module out of it and publish that. It's the entire repo. So,
Mhm.
so even if we only cared about Cinderlib and never wanted Cinder itself to be a package out there, it's still gonna, there's no way to split them out at publish time.
Yeah. But third-party CI and drivers aren't going to be using Cinderlib.
Well, if they want to ensure compatibility, what they would do is they would add the functional test of Cinderlib after they run, like I did for the LVM LIO gateway job, where basically you run Tempest, you have already everything set up, and then you run Cinderlib functional test with it, which is like 50 seconds or something like that. You don't need an additional deployment, you don't need anything.
So this is starting to lead down a rabbit hole, but are we gonna require third-party CI against CinderLib patches then too?
No,
Because
the idea was that they can opt in if they want.
If they want to, if they want to validate that their driver does work.
Yeah,
well
we
with
went through
CinderLib.
this, I know.
I'll shut up, but this doesn't make me feel good about CinderLib, and moving forward, because the whole purpose of CinderLib is to talk directly to the driver. And if we're not testing that against
If it's not
third-party,
tested, it's broken.
exactly. And if anything, well, I don't know. I think we need both. I think we need Cinder and CinderLib third-party CI if we're going to put this in. But we all know how successful Cinder third-party CI is. So
Wildly
Yes.
successful.
One thing that I added to the
Welcome back.
Ansible,
sorry, I came.
one thing that I added to the Ansible script to run CinderLib functional test is that you can say to ignore the errors from the functional test, so you can easily add it to your third-party CI and not block things until we figure out if we wanted to make it compulsory, if it's optional, if a driver can just decide that they don't care.
And then when someone installs CinderLib and uses that driver and it doesn't work, we're at the same issue that we have with Cinder in respect of supporting that. Bugs and what.
Yeah. But we could always have some kind of document where we say which drivers are actually compatible with CinderLib, which are the ones that are running the test.
Kind of like the matrix that we have on the wiki that's never up to date for Cinder.
Well, that's actually been deprecated. There's a newer wiki.
People still read it all the time.
Yeah, it is the go-to still.
We should get rid of that and point to the generated one.
I think somebody I was talking to read that like last year, put a note on that page that was like, really don't look at this.
Please stop reading
Yeah.
this.
This isn't the
Are you reading this?
Yes.
This is not the page you were looking for. Yeah.
So I don't think we're as far along on that as I thought we were. Bummer.
So some of these questions or issues are regardless of where
Yeah.
CinderLib exists, right? Like the third-party CI stuff, I think that's the problem regardless of whether it lives in Cinder or lives in its own repo.
Maybe we should create an Etherpad to get all of this written down somewhere and figure out answers.
Yeah. I'd rather have a lot of this stuff figured out and agreed upon before we merge it.
Okay, so I've got notes from here that I've been taking.
Yeah, we have the publishing and the testing are really the two big.
Oh, you're late for your other meeting?
Yeah.
Do you need somewhere quiet to go?
Probably.
Okay.
Or is there a free cube out there? I guess.
Yeah, just grab a cube that looks empty and
Okay,
go for it. Or yeah.
thanks.
If not, I can show you where there's a free cube if there's not one right outside the door.
Okay.
Yeah, I got a meeting too.
No, you don't.
Oh, it's at 11:30. Okay.
Oh, okay.
Thank God.
So, but I want to make sure we're not backpedaling on being okay with CinderLib going in.
I think CinderLib is a great idea. Just we need to figure out where it lands.
Okay.
And to expose some of the CI issues and figure it out probably at a later date.
Because I mean, I think we kind of committed to Gorka that we would get it in Stein. Are we still okay with that?
I think
If we can
so.
sort these out.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right. So let's make sure that we circle back to trying to answer some of these questions when we get through our other topics, because I think we'll have time while we're here to work on that. But at least get the questions put together and try to start answering some of them so that we can, because I'm afraid that this will fall through the cracks if we don't push on it. So, and since you're here and have the concerns.
I mean, you could just ignore my concerns and go forward, but
I have concerns too, so.
Okay.
So as far as, can we set up a periodic job or something?
That's what I was thinking, yeah.
Because if the concern is that a change in one of the Cinder, something in Cinder might not get propagated to CinderLib. If we were somehow running the CinderLib tests against the current master of Cinder.
And we should probably do that with OS Brick, have
Yeah, do this.
OS Brick
Yeah.
latest and CinderLib latest
We just
periodic
run them every
job.
night and then we get some kind of
And then we can
feedback.
ignore them like we do.
Well, yeah.
well, we can all point to it and say,
Yes.
We'll say, "Oops,
Oh, this broke 3 months ago, okay.
Can the periodic job run against third-party CI? How does that work?
Not for
The
third-party
periodic jobs.
CI. This would be a Zool infra job.
Yeah, then it doesn't help us with the
It doesn't,
with all the drivers.
no, it doesn't help
No.
with third-party CI. This is the other issue of if we, well, not if, we need to break it out into a different repo if we want to publish this. So to do that and make sure that we're not breaking things, which was the whole reason why we wanted it in repo,
Right.
we could at least have a periodic job that makes sure it pulls the latest from Cinder, the latest from CinderLib, and runs tests to make sure that it still works.
Yeah, but we would only be running it against LVM or Ceph or something like that.
Yeah.
All the other drivers, which are
Yep, that's the.
what people are really interested in.
yes.
There's two concerns. There's that we're going to break something just in Cinder with the stuff we're doing, and then there's the other issue of validating third-party drivers actually work. So this doesn't address validating third-party drivers, but it does help make sure that we're just not outright broken.
So look,
And go ahead.
I'm just wondering, so the current third-party CI tests that are running now is installing CinderLib in the Cinder tree.
They're ignoring
They don't- they
CinderLib.
just
Yeah,
ignore
it's
it,
not
right?
doing
So-
anything with CinderLib
Yeah, okay.
right now.
So it's not, but I guess the idea is it would be easier for them to,
Well, if CinderLib's in a separate repo,
they just pull
You
it,
can
they just
still
install it
just
with Pi
pull
or
it in.
something, right? Yeah.
well, you just get clone it probably from master. Still do it.
But there are some valid tests that I could see running, valid changes inside of a driver that might affect CinderLib, such as all the database crap that some of the drivers do, and removing that or changing that or adding a new one might break CinderLib itself, and you're not going to know that unless you have third-party CI running on that specific driver against CinderLib. I think that's, in my mind, the bigger concern.
That's, so basically what you're saying is we said qualified drivers against CinderLib in the same way.
Well, if we decide that that's the goal we're going to go with,
Right.
which is not totally obvious to me, but we
Yeah,
certainly could if we wanted to.
Well, I feel like we had this discussion before, and the answer was, well, if the vendor chooses to certify against CinderLib, great, but we're not going to force them. And then we were going to readdress in the future is if it got onboarded as a requirement, is how I remember the discussion
Because
going.
we still don't require vendors to certify against brick either.
Yeah.
It's the same issue.
I mean, I think part of the problem is if third-party CI was always humming away perfectly and gave us relevant answers. And really, what do I use third-party CI for? It's to check if a vendor's patch can run against their backend, which in the case of CinderLib, well, the changes they're going to be making, aren't specifically against it. So, but yes, whatever they do may break CinderLib is the problem right now.
So the way I look at it is OSBrick is a little bit different in the respect that it's a general purpose library that is all iSCSI drivers should effectively work against a working iSCSI connector. But with CinderLib, the purpose of CinderLib is to be another abstraction layer between the drivers, which is exactly what Cinder was always meant for. And unless you're actually testing that contract between CinderLib and the drivers, you can't really guarantee that it's going to work.
Yeah, there's a lot more contact with the driver than there would be for Brick.
And yes, and since I think CinderLib bypasses a lot of the already existing testing with respect to the call chain into the drivers, such as the volume manager itself, there's a little bit more of an exposure of issues that it has with testing. Because right now the guard between the driver and the Cinder API is the volume manager in terms of Cinder or the backup manager.
I agree, and to prove that point, for example, I found a bug in the 3-part driver based because it doesn't do stat caching as it should. So if you request the value from the cache values, you don't get anything.
Awesome.
And we don't find that in Cinder because we are always asking for a refresh.
Yep.
But in CinderLib, you can directly ask, I don't want a refresh, and then you hit the button in this backend.
Yeah.
Which I was just trying to say that to prove the point of that there are more exposure through CinderLib. Yep.
Okay.
All right. So it's a known potential issue, and regardless of whether it lives in Cinder or another repo, it really doesn't matter to an extent for these types of issues. And there's a case to be made that at some point in the future, we should encourage third-party drivers to have a CI for CinderLib patches. Are we okay just leaving it at that? If you're going to write a new driver, are we going to say, hey, there's CinderLib that we have too, that certain other products are going to use your driver through CinderLib, and it should be qualified against that too, and just highly encourage people to do it until they adopt it, or just.
I think that one of the reasons we also wanted it Cinder, and it was to easily add it to third-party CIs without the burden of running complex setups just to run the test, because you could use whatever Tempest or whatever you already have deployed in the stack to run just the functional test. And you could reduce. Sorry?
Because they're already pulling Cinder.
Yeah, they are pulling Cinder, they are configuring it, and the functional test, what they have is a way to grab the configuration from cinder.conf and use that to run the tests. They change it, and that way they can run. So that way it's easy to run the test. It doesn't consume too much resources. But if you have to add a new job to run it, it means that vendors need to use more resources to run tests.
Yeah, you lose a ton of time just on deployment.
Yeah.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's no doubt about that. I mean, if we can figure out a way to package it separately, if it's part of Cinder, then that's a win-win.
You set up a job that clones the repo, deletes all of Cinder. Can't just set up .py and then.
Well, that's kind of what I was thinking with the submodule thing. You could almost do that by.
Create a subdirectory that has the setup.py and config for CinderLib, and it overwrites it in the, I don't know.
Just look like there is a namespace packages thing you can do with PyPy, but it looks like we would have to rename the Cinder namespace.
Yeah, that's not gonna work. No.
So that ship has sailed.
Okay, I'll show that.
Do we know someone who we can contact to try to figure this one out?
There's got to be some infra guys that know all of this stuff really well.
Who's the best guy in this?
I wasn't paying attention to everything. What are we trying to do?
Well,
We're
it's
just
back
figuring
to,
out
yeah,
the
so
whole
it really does
problem.
look like it's much better if Cinder lives in Cinder. Because it'll
Then we
make it a
can't
lot
publish
easier.
it. We can't publish it then, unless we do the full
Unless we
thing.
have some kind of a hack in place that we have a subdirectory that has all the config files and overwrites it. That's, I don't know what else to do.
Well,
Yeah.
the thing is that since we don't know all the insights, the idea would be to talk with someone from infra or I don't know where that
Well, what
actually
do we need
knows,
to know?
so we can.
What do
Well,
we
the first
do?
question is like, we can't be the first people that run into this problem.
Yeah, and that's why they split out repos. We don't need to ask here for it. If we are publishing a package, it needs to be in a separate repo. Or we need to do some really ugly hack in a release job that mucks with the code and changes the setup config and does all this stuff that's not standard with
Well,
anything.
I mean, if we made a Cinderlib repo that just had the setup.py stuff, and you'd get submodule of Cinder, check out the relevant version, you can publish from that, and that repo doesn't actually really have to contain anything other than
I didn't think we supported submodules.
I think there's some projects that use something like that.
Maybe.
I don't remember.
All right, so the two options is just we go ahead with Cinderlib as a separate repo, or we ask questions, and I think it's worth asking questions at this point, seeing if it's at all possible, and if it's not, then there's our answer.
If we can use a submodule, then we probably could. But then we're going to have a problem because publishing, if they do push up Cinder as a package, it's going to contain Cinderlib.
It'll contain Cinderlib.
Well, you can tell it to exclude the paths or something in the config files we have.
Yeah, they would have to change from how it is right now.
Well, it's the same
Well,
thing we
then,
do
but
for,
then
like,
no, then
unit.
if we do exclude it there, then we're not going to be able to run the test because it's not going to install that module.
Yeah.
So
Hi, Gorka. I didn't know you were sharing your video. Nice headphones. I've got those.
I'll stop sharing my video now.
Oh, no more Gorka.
Yeah, the only way to do it right as far as publishing goes is to have it in its own repo.
Which makes getting people to do CI on it harder because it becomes a whole separate job.
Well, it doesn't have to become a separate job. You just have to, wherever we would run the functional tests with it in the tree, we just have to clone Cinderlib or install it.
As part of the job, you just tell it to, instead of pipey, install Cinderlib to
Latest from Git.
get clone.
Cinderlib.
But really, that would only need to be triggered if there were Cinderlib changes, which should be infrequent, right?
I mean,
Can you trigger the same job from?
No, then they would have to have two separate jobs set up.
Oh, okay.
I think it'd probably be sufficient if they just always get the latest Cinderlib on Cinder patches. So it's not going to catch the exact patch that would break something if it is a change on the Cinderlib side, but it would catch anything on the Cinder side.
Okay.
So,
I'll have a look at the releases repository and see if I can figure out in the code if it could be easy to make it possible to release multiple packages or not.
there's not going to be anything in there that does it right now, so we'd have to write a
Yeah.
job.
That's why I said that I'll have a look to see if I can easily add it.
Yeah.
Because, like you said, it's not going to be there.
And I'm really concerned about having a release job that modifies the code being released after,
Yeah.
that just seems wrong.
Remember, Gorka's magic. He can make anything work.
Yeah. It can be done, and it's just, do we want it to do that?
Nervous release people.
Maybe there's a way to do it and set up that CFG or Pi that specify 2 different projects. And
It seems amazing that that would be something that you can't do.
I know it seems very simple. I'm like, why wouldn't you want that ability to do that?
Most cases, why don't we just put them into separate repos?
Well, I could see a project having a daemon and a service and a client and out of the same code base and shipping 2 different packages for those. I don't know. It seems like it should be possible. Okay. I think we killed this one.
Yeah.
Oh, poor horse. Okay. So that drops us into consistency group cleanup discussion was what I had scheduled.
Oh, yeah, I forgot about that one.
Yeah, I gotta skip out for a work meeting.
Okay.
Back in all day.
Let me know if you can't find a place to go hide.
Yeah, okay.
Make sure to talk loudly about proprietary things.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'll show you where Maro's cube is. He's got to record. Letting people roam freely around the building. Well, this is my office anyway. Trying to think, Gorka, while you're on, is there any other topics that we needed you for today? Doesn't look like it.
You might have an interest in that OS brick one.
Tomorrow morning, I wanted to talk about where things are at with getting the HA locking in place. Will you be available for that?
When tomorrow? Oh, I see. At 9:30, 10.
Yeah.
Which I will have to figure out what time it is today. I mean, in my time zone.
Okay.
But that should be in the evening, right?
That's 2
Okay.
hours. That's 2 hours earlier than it is now. Tomorrow.
Uh-huh.
What time is it there right now? Oh.
30 minutes past 5 p.m.
Okay, so
5:30 p.m.
so it'd be 3:30 p.m. tomorrow.
3:30. Yep, I can be there.
Okay, good. Sounds good. What was the one you just mentioned?
I went 2:30 today. I think Abhishek was talking about some of this before,
Oh,
but I don't know if there's, I don't know what else going on with that one.
and Avishai was out in IRC. So yeah, so Gorka, do we have more that we need to talk about with the OS brick bug and cleaning up old connections on when you create a new connection?
Well, I think the follow-up code that Abhishek is going to add is right now, the code we added the other day was basically you do the connection, the driver has provided a WWN, and afterwards you confirm that all the paths that you're returning actually, or that you're going to be using for the multipath are correct, and if not, you abort. That had a problem that I realized the other day, which is if you had something that it actually if you had a leftover, this detects it, and suddenly all the data that you have buffered there is dropped. So it's, I don't know if it gets dropped or if you actually corrupt the volume the way it is doing it right now. So the idea of the follow-up was to actually check the system to see if the volume is somewhere in there. You know, you would say, okay, I noted WWN, so let's check the system and see if that volume is already connected. But I don't think that helps us in any way now that I think about it, because the problem is other. Oh, no, sorry. No, what you would do is, I'm sorry, my mind is slipping. What you would do is, given the connection information, for example, the LAN, you would look and see if the system is already using that LAN with another WWN before you do the connection. That way you can tell beforehand if you are going to have a conflict.
Oh yeah, this was the case where a LAN identifier is reused for different connections, I think.
Yeah, basically the problem is you attach a volume, you make a request to detach it, but always break fails. Nobody ignores it and says that everything is okay. So there is a call to Cinder to unmap it. So right now in the system, that is running the hypervisor, there is a connection to a volume that no longer exists. But as soon as that LAN is reused, that node will be connected. If you connect it to the same node, the Nova node. So when you go and you try to connect the new volume using the same LAN, you actually have it potentially with unbuffered data, and you will flash it on the new volume, data from a different one, and you corrupt the volume. So the idea would be, before you start doing the connection, given the WWN, the LAN, and everything, to check the system and see if you already have that LAN in use.
So is the problem with what Avishai pushed up already, the fact that it only checks the WWN and doesn't also look for the LAN?
Well, the problem is that it is done afterwards. So you do the connection, and once you do the connection, you check the paths and you say, hey, I have LAN 0 connected to a different volume. I have 3 devices that are pointed to the right device and one that is pointed somewhere else to a different volume. So what it does is it closes, it does a disconnect, which is a problem because you would be flushing the data from the volume that is, you may be flushing data into the new volume from an old volume because you're doing it after the connection. If you do it before, then you don't, well, yeah, well, no, this is tricky. Because, oh shit. No, yeah, because the problem we're trying to fix is mostly for systems that don't have, for example, the new feature in iSCSI to disable automatic scans. So the system would, oh shit, it wouldn't even work. You would, yep. It wouldn't fix it because as soon as the backend maps the LAN and exports it and maps it to the node, the system would receive an asynchronous message, re-scan, and automatically add it, and the system will flash it now because it's there. So this would only be helpful checking it before doing the connection. if the system has manual scans, for example, for ASCII, and you had left a volume when detached. In that case, it would be helpful. So there is some cases where it could be helpful to check prior to doing the connection. And the questions he was asking, I think, were related to how to figure out if a device is already connected in the system.
Okay.
No. It's sorry. 11:30, and let me. It's not. It could not be helpful on that. On those.
Oh, okay.
It would not be helpful.
Okay. Gotcha. Oh, so it only would work where. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, because if the system automatically scans the volume and detects it, then as soon as it gets detected and it sees that it has some flash data, it will flash it, and
Even if
that's the corruption.
Okay. Gotcha.
And what I mentioned to Abhishek earlier is that this is all happening because nobody's ignoring our errors. We tell them, hey, I couldn't detach it, and they don't care, which is not great.
So, I mean, is it the fact that we need to go and actually change what Nova is doing? But I'm guessing that's equally hard.
The problem that they have is that, as far as I know, when you're destroying a VM, they start destroying the network, disconnecting the volume, and they didn't want to block a VM being removed just because the volume is still, it failed to detach. So they continued and ignored the error.
Yeah, their priority is to just get rid of the instance. And so they try to tear down the volumes, but if something breaks in that process, they just say, whatever, we're going to keep tearing it down to get rid of the instance.
And okay.
So I think that was a deliberate decision in Nova to do it that way.
Yeah, but then the consequence is that you get data corruption, you have leftover devices, but that is our problem, right?
Yeah.
Is data corruption bad?
I mean, for those people that actually run stuff on this, I guess.
All right.
And I added a feature in OS break so that you can actually force a disconnect and drop the buffer data if you don't care about it. And I think Lee was adding its support in Nova, but I don't know the status, because this is useful if you are using a boot volume from Cinder and you want to delete it on deletion of the instance. Because if you say, I don't care about losing buffer data, then you pass the force and ignore errors parameters, and then OS break will actually drop the buffers and it wouldn't care. So it would not leave leftovers even if there was a problem on the disconnection in that case.
Okay. So we still have some bugginess here that we don't have a solution for, unfortunately.
Correct. Yep.
Okay. Thoughts on how we should go forward with this? Leave Avishai to keep driving it since he saw it first. Has he been reaching out to you more to work on it at all, or?
We chat the other day in the ERC meeting, and now he's pinging me. But since I started attending this meeting, I didn't answer. But yeah, I believe he's working on it, and since there are cases where it could be useful, I don't see why we shouldn't do it.
Okay. Okay. So I'll leave it that you guys are continuing to drive that right now. If he's been reaching out to you, and hopefully you guys can come to an agreement on how to fix that in the future.
Wasn't Avishai also only fixing it on fiber?
No, he's only fixing it on iSCSI.
Oh.
We don't have anybody with fiber channel to test it, to fix it there. Anybody have fiber?
Somebody somewhere.
So, I think the last people I knew that had any was Pure, and I don't know that they're terribly active right now. So
I think our QA department has one somewhere, but I don't know.
PowerMax has fiber channel. Hi, Gus. Guys. Okay, so we do have somebody that has fiber channel that could help out. So that's good.
Do we know how to test this? Do you have to do some weird failure situation?
Well, you would need to induce a case where you're trying to reuse a LUN that hasn't been disconnected properly from the node.
In iSCSI, it's pretty easy to simulate. You just have something writing a lot of data in the VM to the disk, and then you make IP tables filters to drop all the data, so it gets buffer and it cannot go through. Then you disconnect the volume, so it fails. Well, disconnect and kill the instance, and then you on the next one, if Nova should then map the volume, and most backends would map the next volume you create on the same LAN. So the next time you connect it, you will have the problem. For fiber channel, I don't know. We would have to figure out something similar.
Okay. All right. Well, so this is good. You and Avishai are working on fixes. We have somebody who could help try to figure out how to fix it for fiber channel. So it doesn't sound like there's a lot more we can do right now other than just let you guys work it and then try to verify it get the right people in place to verify it once we have the more fully featured fix out there. Make sense to everybody? Come on, even the people in the room have stopped
Yes.
paying attention. Darn it. Wake up. I need my air horn. Is this going to be like the PTG in Dublin where I had to
I
start
was just
playing
gonna-
sound effects to
yeah.
get people's attention?
Soundboard.
I'll do it. Dang it. All right. So let's wrap that one up. Do we want to try to talk about the consistency group stuff before lunch? And then... There we go. We'll keep Sean engaged by letting him be the soundboard. Okay. My hands smell like an airplane. That's weird.
I guess there's worse. If Helen is on, do we want to try to quick do that topic we skipped over before lunch?
Sure. Helen, you want to chat with us about your topic that we rescheduled?
Or we can push till tomorrow.
Well, if we can get it done now, that would be fine.
You know, we only have 12 minutes before we had scheduled a lunch break, but I'm at least see how far we can get. I can use chat. Oh, okay.
You can use chat only. Sure. We
Let's
can use
chat
chat.
and IRC if we can, and not
Um,
Etherpad.
Can we get you to join IRC? Well, she's listening, so I don't know why I'm typing that as well. She can hear us fine. Okay. So, well, if she can hear us, then she can type and we'll,
Say what you said.
yes. Okay,
Someone can beat the text to speech.
I can hear you. Fine.
Stephen Hawking, IRC to voice for sure.
That would be fun. Okay, so what, all right, so I'm putting this here right now. So what is the discussion here, Helen?
So I think the discussion is about revert to snapshot. When we implemented it, we only revert to the latest snapshot.
Okay,
And I think this is a proposal to revert to older snapshots.
Okay.
Which we, if I remember correctly, did not do the first time around because it's harder and has a lot more things to sort out around how it performs on different backends and how do you implement it in any kind of efficient way and that kind of stuff.
okay.
So I remember in Barcelona, we talked about this, and I thought there were some driver maintainers in the room that either, I don't know if it was an actual concern or they weren't sure, but they thought if they went back to N-3 snapshots, that N-2 and N-1 would be no longer usable.
Yeah, but that's an implementation thing. It depends on how you implement it.
Yeah.
The correct way to think about this is if it's valuable for users to revert to any snapshot, drivers that can do it efficiently can do it efficiently, and other drivers can do some generic shove a bunch of data around.
Yeah, shuffle, create a new volume.
Which is what we
Well,
do already for revert. But
yeah, because they have to be,
well, they would basically
how would they swap out a volume?
you would basically create a snapshot that's preserving your previous volume, clone a new volume from your old snapshot, and then write all the data into the existing volume.
But how does the driver, would the driver be able to tell Cinder that it's now this other backend volume and not the original backend volume?
Well, it wouldn't be in the end. You would create a cloned volume temporarily, I think, and then write data back to the original volume.
I don't know. Can they all do that?
I mean, anybody that can attach a volume can do that.
Well, yeah.
Whether we think it's a great idea is a different question. I haven't heard a lot of feedback on revert to snapshot and how people use it and like it and what they need. I did find out that it apparently doesn't work a lot of the time right now with that.
Oh, really?
That patch I posted the other day. Or no, sorry, it doesn't work if you have snapshot metadata.
Oh, yeah.
Which I guess is actually rare in the real world. I don't know. So it's a sensible feature. It seems mostly like a question of the trade-offs of how you implement it and whether we think it's like worth the effort to do.
And if I remember right, we implemented the API, leaving it open that you could specify a different
because you can pass
snapshot.
in an ID for what you want it
Yeah.
to revert to.
But right now we just enforce that it's only the last.
And I'm sure there are a couple backends that can do this in a reasonably efficient way. I don't know how many.
So you got a volume with some number of snapshots, right?
Yes.
And the idea is you want to say, I don't want this volume anymore. I want to go back to the state of this volume.
I think you're going the wrong way. So
No. Well, if we're reverting to a previous snapshot,
yeah,
right? So we're taking, V1, whatever it is, and going back to the state of its snapshot at
right.
snapshot. Well, okay, yeah, so the numbering is probably,
Yeah, but that's the concept.
Yeah. so some backends are able to just say, okay, this volume is now at that point in time.
Yeah, they can basically just change the pointer internally.
Yeah, but that's
to their storage
that's not even enough though. Because even if you can do that quickly, you have to account for the fact that you have other snapshots that you have now jumped over,
Right.
which just because you can revert like that doesn't mean that you've done that. I don't think. What does that mean?
I have no idea what that means.
Maybe that was there. I'm dropping.
Oh, Spring Hope, North Carolina is calling us.
Oh,
Don't answer.
I'm just going to ignore it.
so it's great that a backend can revert to an older snapshot, but nobody, I think, stated whether that means they can do that without wiping out other snapshots that have happened since that one.
So I'm guessing that Helen's backend can do this. How do they handle it? Given that they're asking to be able to do this.
But I think a lot of storage can,
Probably.
but
I'm
there are
fairly
some that can't.
I mean, I'm fairly sure that we could do this in Ceph in a way that would be better than the dumb generic copying method.
Because in other words, the answer is we do a clone from this, right?
Well, this is what I was kind of implementing in my head right now, but
And then from that, replace.
yeah,
Write data over.
unless they support attaching a snapshot, in which case maybe you could do.
I think that was the question of, at that point, you're better off just creating a volume from snapshot and then using that new volume versus trying to.
Yeah, but the whole point of the feature is around if you don't want a new volume, if you just want to be able to roll back the one you currently have with the same ID and all that stuff. I mean, Cinder's answer has always been just make a new volume, which is easy, but it's sometimes of questionable, whether that's really what people want.
And why wouldn't they? Quotas?
No, weird things like licenses being tied to some identifier on some machine. You run into quota stuff because you have to, for some amount of time, consume more space. You have to mentally keep track of the fact that you have a different volume and you have to switch over. Well, I mean, if we have snapshots, it makes sense to be able to use them to do things on a volume.
Oh, yeah.
And,
no, I totally
and
agree.
historically, Cinder has not done that. This is like a fairly recent feature
Yeah,
that you can actually like use a snapshot directly to do stuff.
Okay.
And it seems reasonable to do. But there's a lot of implementation questions here that are not obvious about how this plays out on actual backends.
So were you saying Ceph is not able to just change an internal pointer and be back to the original data, older data?
Well, I think you can, but what I was saying was you can't just change the pointer because then your snapshot 3 is like left in some other place, right?
Not- My experience is with the SE storage.
Maybe not.
You can point that volume at any one of those snapshots and it doesn't make a difference.
Yeah. Yeah, that's bad. Yeah, that's probably true.
I'm thinking something like maybe the VMDK driver, if you revert to an older snapshot, then that could mess up your other snapshots. So
Yeah, and I think what's going to happen in some drivers, like maybe that one, is if you did the revert to S2, it would actually create like a new snapshot 4 that S2 then points to. And, you know,
so that can preserve S2.
yeah, if it doesn't have the ability to
Yeah.
natively go back in time.
So I think the main question Helen had was, if they're going to work on this, are we supportive of it? Which it sounds like.
It seems to me like this would be a nice thing to do if we find it likely that there are at least a handful of drivers that are going to do something useful with it.
Okay.
That would be my guess.
Okay.
If we know that it's not just going to be one driver doing it, then it seems like it would be a nice thing to do.
Well, and I think we wanted, what we were hoping for at the end of the talk in Barcelona was that the maintainers of the drivers that thought they would have issues to do some research and figure out what those issues are and how they could work around it.
Well, and that's part of the thing was there was some concern around my driver can't do that, which
Yeah.
is not a valid concern because any driver you can attach it and write data to the volume. So there's always a way to achieve the right outcome.
Well, the concern wasn't whether they could go back to N-2,
Yeah.
it was whether they could go back to N-2 and still have consistency between what Cinder thought was available for snapshots and what was actually available for snapshots.
Right. So there's questions maybe about design in the Cinder API for this too, is are we sure that if you go back to 2, do we require that we keep 3 since it's a newer snapshot? Or do we design it where if you go back to an older one, you may get rid of other snapshots?
I would think the desire would be to keep 3.
That would be ideal, for sure. But I don't know if
Yeah.
it would make it easier for anybody if there was different requirements around it.
I'm just thinking it for an operator, say they applied a patch and that messed something up, so they're trying to recover from that. So they try going back and they go too far and realize, oh, no, let me go try a later snapshot and then realize, wait, that data is now gone. So
There was also some, I'm trying to remember if it was actually a concern or not, but one of the outcomes of this is that your snapshot chain is no longer linear, I think.
yeah, because you probably, depending on the storage, you probably end up with a S2 here.
Yeah.
Then what happens to S1? Do you still need that or, because that can't be valid anymore?
But that's the part where it depends on the storage. 'Cause
Okay.
some storage
Well,
can handle that, and some
Really?
storage.
Well, I mean, what we're gonna have to do in Cinder is say, if your driver's gonna revert like this, then we have to guarantee that you're gonna preserve that. And if your storage doesn't natively preserve it, then you're gonna have to fall back to some, other clunky copying things around to make sure the semantics are right.
Yeah.
Because we have to know what the exact model is for how the snapshots work, and it's gonna have to be the same for all different drivers. The main difference is gonna be performance between drivers, but the model for how the snapshots work has to be the same for all of them.
Should end up in the same end state.
Yeah.
So since we don't have a ton of driver maintainers in the room right now, if Helen is interested in pursuing this, maybe have a spec written up and then see what kind of feedback we get on that from drivers.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure we can hunt down 4 or 5 driver people to see how this is gonna go for people.
Yeah. Bring it up in Cinder meetings for
How
a couple
many, how
weeks.
many drivers have implemented the revert snapshot that we have now?
That's a good
Because
question.
there's a generic mechanism for it.
Right.
I don't know.
Helen
Looks like
says
there's
she
some,
says they can write up a spec.
Did she join IRC?
there's a,
No, she's still in the.
Just logging in underneath
so
it.
we've
Okay.
pretty much got Dell EMC, HP, VMware, SolidFire, IBM, that have done the current one.
Okay.
So, I mean, that's not a huge amount of drivers for even the basic version we already have.
Yeah.
But that could just be because maybe a lot of people figure the generic mechanism is good enough. I don't know.
Yeah. Maybe that's simpler. And if we can implement a generic mechanism that handles this, which I think actually it should with the way it does it, it just mounts up a volume and writes the data over, right?
Yeah, the interesting parts were, I don't remember too much about how we implemented the current one, but the interesting details in there that I recall were things around making temporary snapshots so you could still bail out in a sensible way if some IO operation failed when you're copying data around.
Oh, right.
Because there's a whole dance you really have to do that correctly so that you don't like halfway revert and then end up stuck in like this no good
Total corruption. Yeah.
which I don't actually remember. I don't actually know how we do that in the current mechanism and if it even does what it really should do or not. It's been a long time since I looked at it until I started poking at this other bug with this the other day.
So it sounds like we're okay if Helen wants to put together a spec for it. The thing is that it needs to be able to support backends doing it efficiently and have a generic implementation mechanism as well.
Yeah, and we'll need to in the spec very clearly write out like snapshots work like this, and when you do certain operations, these are the guarantees that have to be held. Because all that stuff seems obvious until somebody goes and does something crazy.
It's jail cam.
Okay. Spec will need to handle this both for drivers that have support in the back end as well as a generic implementation for all drivers.
And we think that the current generic implementation is probably fairly close to what's required, I think. Because it does this whole, it just mounts it and copies data.
And if there's a driver that can't optimally handle just going directly to a snapshot, but can do something better than that generic handling, then they still have the opportunity to implement something.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Does that sound good to you, Helen? Hopefully. And then we'll just watch for a spec from you guys and work through details there. Okay, all good. All right. Thank you. So should we break for lunch?
Sure.
I'm hungry. And we'll return sometime between 1 and 1:30. We'll ping people out in IRC when we're back online. So see you guys a little bit later.
Do we want to reshuffle some of these on the agenda? No, we didn't do the consistency group cleanup.